Hey, Paul.
Hey Fab,
You done? How are you?
good.
Good.
What are
Nice.
we what are we talking about today?
I'll pretend we didn't prepare this before.
Yeah, we're all
We're
just
talking
like
about sales processes and actually building a sales process that focuses on client objectives and client journey and buyer's journey and all that stuff.
yeah,
I guess the insight there is that like every CRM, obviously, like I work with HubSpot. Today is even clearer than usual. Um, comes in with a built-in sales process, right? Just so
yes.
that people can get started. But those sales processes are very vanilla. Not that they're bad per se. It's just they're plain and don't really take into account anything related to your customer, right? It's just like a standard thing that everybody gets. I'm sure Salesforce does the same thing. I'm sure Pipedrive does the same thing. It's but but to make a real sales process work, it has to take into account your client almost first and foremost, right? Like it's if you're doing things that are not helping you work with them and understand their objectives and stuff like that, then it's just a series of steps, right? Like you don't actually like the CRM is not actually a helpful tool in that point, right? It's just like a repository of opportunities and deals and customers and contacts and stuff like that. So that's kind of how I saw it. How do you see it?
Oh well, I think it's kind of obvious that we see things similarly as we've been doing this for several years. But yeah, I see it the same way in that the you said it well. The sales processes that come with any CRM are vanilla, unless you're super lucky and it just happens to meet your criteria. But particularly as to we've talked about this a lot in the past. Is offline. We haven't talked about it on a podcast actually. That you need to have specific milestones you need to reach to go from one stage to the other. And those milestones are often very customized, right? Very
Right.
personalized. To go from one stage to the other. To be honest with you, I think most sales processes you get it right. Most CRMs get it right in having let's say 5 to 7 stages. You don't want to have a million stages. I remember dealing with one client once that had like 25 stages to the sales process. I was like, whoa. What we ended up doing is breaking those down into and creating some milestones because that's really
Yeah.
what they were. But all that to say that when you do that, it's an interesting process to create the sales process because what you have to do is I think, and it says it in the title of what we spoke about today, is really take into consideration. Obviously, the objective is a sale. We know that, right? You want closed one, but what gets you to the sale, particularly in a B2B situation, is understanding the objectives that your client has. And I think some sales processes don't always do that. It's always, well, what you need to do. You're introducing yourself, you're discovering a little bit, then you're pitching, and then you're closing. Whereas if you do it properly, your sales process, in my opinion, will
Hmm.
have some milestones that ensure that you're finding out what the client objectives are. Because if you don't find out the client objectives, then you're just blindly moving forward like an army guy that's trying to invade a country. Whereas what you're really trying to do is convince the people from that country that they need your product rather than invading.
Right.
So, uh, and I guess on that note, what I would say is building that sales process in my mind has um, there's a certain way of doing it. But I'll let you comment. Then maybe we can go into effectively how to do this. Like, what are the steps you should take to actually build your sales
Yeah.
process?
Yeah. I mean, you're like I like what you said. Like it's milestones and not stages, right? Because every wording and every system is always what's the stage or what's the step, or
Yeah,
I'm sure they all have variations to differentiate a bit from each other. But at the end of the day, and it makes it really feel like, well, this is step one and sort of stage one, and when I speak to clients, I talk about stage one, stage two, like stuff like that. But it's a convenient way to look to verbalize it, but at the end of the day, they're all milestones. Like what, what does a client or what do you need to do to be able to achieve that goal, which is the sale, and to understand their objectives,
Yep.
right? I think that's milestones. I like is interesting because milestones indicate that I find like stages are very linear almost, and the sales process does need to be linear, but whereas milestones, I don't know, indicate more of a journey, a path, right? And I might spend a lot of time in stage one, very little bit in stage two, and where a stage almost feels like, well, you know, this should be 15 minutes and this should be 20
Yeah,
minutes
yeah,
and this
yeah,
should be
yeah,
an hour, whereas journey or milestones is more like, like when we're talking about a project, let's say, and you have milestones, like there's very clearly defined moments of in your project that are
exactly. Like
milestones.
your milestones are career. You know, like if you think of the original meaning of a milestone is like you've reached this mile. So your
Yeah,
milestones is okay. You've done this, and it's very. It's all it. Most of the time, I mean, some milestones are less tangible, but to me, a milestone is very tangible. It's very tactical. It's something that you've achieved specifically. So, for example, one of the milestones we might put in there is your elevator pitch or your conversation starter. Well, have you
yeah,
done that? And if you're in a business development pipeline, well, you need to have done some kind of elevator pitch at one point or some kind of introduction. Unless it's an inbound pipe, but let's assume it's an outbound pipe. Well, you need to. That's one of the milestones. I'm doing my conversation starter.
yeah,
Another milestone is, and I'm giving some generic ones here, but what's the title of the decision maker I'm speaking to or the influencer I'm speaking to?
right,
And these are within, these are usually within, to me, one stage, the initial stage or the secondary stage, if you have a preparatory stage, and then you're going from there. So a milestone is very, very tactical and tangible, but
mm,
just to create your sales process. Like if you're someone who does sales, and you probably have, everyone has an internal sales process. Everyone does.
mm-hmm,
But what you want to do, what I think the best way to build your sales process is to look at the sales staff that do it, and then you check out or you find out what the best practices are, and you
mm,
you categorize them into stages and milestones. And
mm,
what I find a lot of people do in their sales process now or CRM now, what they're integrating and they're forgetting to do, a lot of it is based on actions. And actions are important, right? So, what are you doing at what stage? But what some sales processes forget to do is they forget to look at methodology. So, what do I mean by that? Is what needs to be said. So, your conversation starter is an action, but there's methodology in there. What's happening? So what's the introductory stage? What's the question stage? What are the things you're trying to do in that? So you've got methodology in there, and methodology is not just an action of saying I'm doing the conversation starter, but what's happening? Where's the meat? What's being said? What comes out of that? And your CRM, if it's well set up and has a good sales process, will trigger you doing the right methodology in the action that's being done. I don't know. Does that make sense? Am I clearly defining that? So action is doing the conversation starter, and methodology is what am I saying in
yeah,
conversation starter.
yeah, and then that's critical, right? Like I think that's the important part, right? Because I mean, anybody can have, yeah. I mean, because and we're going back to like those default pipelines that HubSpot or whoever adds in when you first open the box for variable box when you first log in and you have your sales process in there. It'll be like the first step in HubSpot is appointment scheduled, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
okay, fine, but what's
That's
happening?
the hardest thing to do, to freaking schedule your appointment. So what are you
Yeah,
doing to get
but
there?
what happens, right? Like, do you need to qualify them before? Like, what
Yeah,
kind of appointment is this? Is this kind of a first one, like a
yeah,
pre-discovery, where you just, like, there's a lot of, so the what is critical. Like, it's almost more important than I mean, they go together, so I don't think one can live without the other, but it's almost more important, right? It's easy to say, well, first I'm going to do a discovery, and then I'm going to do X, and then Y, and then whatever. But it's, what are you doing during the discovery? Like, what are you saying?
Yeah, what's
What are you
happening?
discovering, right?
Yeah,
Like,
what are
because
you
you'll discover
discovering?
different. You'll I can say I have a discovery, you can say you have a discovery, but we're obviously, we're in, there's a close proximity to what we both do, but ultimately we work differently with clients, and my discovery will look very different than your
Yeah.
discovery,
And what
right?
you need to do is get the best practices from all those discoveries, put them in there, and show the action and the method. That way, you're using the same semantics. And the
Yeah,
semantics is, well, what do you call the deal stage, and what's happening in that deal stage, action wise and methodology wise? What am I saying? So if we agree on all that, then we're all moving in the same direction. Now we might
yeah,
use slightly different terms. Like if I'll give you an example. If my conversation starter is, "Hey, my name's Paul. I help guitar buyers find the best guitars who are confused with all the choices out there. Are you facing the same challenges?" Well, you might
yeah,
say it very differently. "Hey, I'm Fab Calando. I own an expert guitar store. I help people like you who are unsure." There's a lot there that can happen that personalizes it. But essentially, what's happening is that there is an elevator pitch, and there is a system to that elevator pitch, which is your methodology, and
right,
that's where you can trace that. But before you even get there, you need to say, well, what am I doing for the client? Why, I'm helping them find guitars. Okay, why? Because they're rock stars. Why? Because this is how they earn their living, and they need guitars that are reliable, that the strings work underwater, and they can fly in the air at 30,000 feet and not have all the strings bust. So but what's going on is, what are my clients' objectives? Usually, what am I trying to do? So your sales process, your actions, and your methodology should be client focused, so that you can help them, obviously, to close your sale, and that creates efficiency. But your sales process should be driving you to do this. It should be guiding you and helping you through the milestones, through the
mm,
actions, through the methodology that we're calling for, to help you achieve those goals. And they should be doing that for everyone on your team that's selling a similar product.
yeah. I have this weird analogy that's coming to mind, which is like, I was listening to, I know we've referenced him a few times, but Rick Rubin's has a podcast, and his, I don't know his latest, but one of his latest guests was like Stephen Pressfield, which is like a quite a popular writer.
Okay.
And Stephen Pressfield was talking about, like, every story, every book or movie or whatever has like I forget the word he used, but let's call it a theme, right? Like, so he was giving the example that, Rocky's theme is like, any bum can do it, can make it if you
Yeah.
work hard enough at it, right? Like, that's the theme of the movie. And and he was giving an example of one writer. I forget the name of the writer. He would, like, as soon as he would figure out what the theme of the book was, he would like post it on his. It's an older writer, so the typewriter, and he would just like relentlessly remove anything in his story that didn't serve the theme, right? And so that's a
Okay.
bit the same
Yeah.
thing
Yeah.
with this process, right? Like, you have to be very conscious
Yeah.
about what you're doing, and which is like, I like how you said it, which is, what do you do for your customers, what are their objectives, and how do you help them achieve those objectives, like, if that's a goal of your process. Yeah, I mean, obviously the goal is a sale at the end of the day, but the sale means that you're helping somebody, right? And so if if everything in your process kind of points them to that, is
It's a continuous reminder
yeah,
that you're helping your client achieve something. So I like that. The post-it above the typewriter, it says, "Hey, what's the theme? My theme
yeah,
is, how can I help my client move forward?" Of course, it brings you sales, and that pays for your business. But it really, if you're just sales driven, and you're just trying to sell your product, and you're not considering your client, well, either you've got a really good commodity that's going out there, but eventually, if it's a service, well, if your client feels that you're only in it to make your sale, well, they're not going to have a lot of faith in you being able to help them achieve their objectives. And of course, we're talking B2B, and we're talking mostly complex sales. We're talking mostly service or product, but something that requires some kind of interaction. If you're a
yeah,
B2C selling some, fun widget, you might have a different sales process, but you probably don't have a CRM at that point. People, I rarely see people at, electronics store filling up the CRM after they have a client coming in. So
No, but anything that online will definitely have a CRM, right?
yes,
Like let's say
correct.
let's talk Best Buy. If you go to the store, yeah, they might not document that you just bought a TV, but if you go online and buy that
Yeah,
same TV, you're
yeah,
definitely documented,
yeah,
hands down. And ultimately, yeah, like the goals of a B2C buyer are different than a B2B buyer, but there's still goals, right?
yeah,
And there's
yeah,
still something to understand
yeah.
there.
Well,
It's different, and the sales are usually quite a lot faster, but maybe not, right? If we're talking about cars, it's still a slower purchasing decision. But there's needs and there's goals and there's objectives there. Some are much maybe more vanity driven than they might be in B2B. But even you'd be surprised, even B2B can be
yeah,
very vanity
yeah. No,
driven.
that's a good point. And it's true that we've said this before, and I like that. I like that terminology. Actually, in B2C sales, there's a lot more. Uh, I don't want to say posturing, but it is. It's posturing all of us, like the clothes we wear, the watches we wear, the guitars we play, the drums we play,
Yeah,
the cars we drive, the houses we buy. There, a lot of it, it's not strictly based on logic. Where I think in B2B more than in B2C. I'm not saying entirely, but
yeah,
more than in B2C. There's a logic there. But even then,
yeah,
you're right. If you've got a complex sale on B2C, you might very well have a CRM. But I guess
yeah.
ultimately, when you're building that sales process, to come back to what we're saying is when you're building that sales process, in my opinion, is break it down. I would say, and maybe this is controversial, and you maybe disagree with me, and I hope you do. Um, I would say, but maybe not. I would say break it down, and I think you kind of don't because you mentioned it first. Break it down into the specific milestones of what needs to happen to sell, and then create your deal stages logically according to what's moving forward. So if you've got, I don't know, 25, 30, 40 milestones that need to happen from A to Z, well, then break it down. Okay, how much of this is preparation?
Hmm.
How much of this should happen in the logically introduction call that lasts, let's say in my business from 2 to 10 minutes? How much of
Hmm.
that should happen in the discovery phase, which might be one call half an hour or 10 calls 1 hour? And then how much of that should happens in the confirmation stage, which you and I have talked about this a lot, which I think is really, really important because you're confirming everything you've discovered, linking it up to what solutions they're looking for to be able to create a proposal. So it's a link point between the discovery and the proposal phase.
Hmm.
And then after that, how much of it, what happens in proposal stage? To me, the proposal stage is alone, but it's super simple because you've confirmed everything you need. You've talked to them about it. Um, you're basically putting on paper what you've confirmed to them and showing them how your offer is going to help them achieve their objectives. And
Hmm.
then how much of it comes in. You might have a post proposal stage where people need to go back and talk to a team, particularly if it's an RFP. Or if you're lucky, you can go straight from proposal to the closing stage. But what are all the milestones that happen, and where do you want to slot them in?
Hmm.
And from there, uh, talk about it with your whole team. Like, George, how do you do stuff? Jane, how do you do stuff? Julia, how do you do stuff? Oh yeah, that's really good. How do we integrate that into a milestone? How do we create a common language and agree on where this should happen in the qualification stage, right? And to me, you'll notice that in my stages, there's never a qualification stage, because what I say to people is you're qualifying from the first time you speak to them to seconds before they buy. It's all a qualification stage. You're
Right.
always deciding if you can flush them. So, and then you talk to everyone and what's happening, and okay, how do we restructure? So what are the milestones? And then once you have all that, okay, how do we stick that into stages? And what does that look like? And then make sure that the experts, the people that do really well in your enterprise, have chimed in. And then you're going to have a personalized sales process. But you might have
Yeah.
5 of these. You might have one on inbound. You might have one on outbound. You might have one on web sales. You might have one on upsell. You might have one on account management. You might have one on farming. You could have, in a large enterprise, you might have many different sales processes. Okay, I've been talking way too much. Comment.
um, yeah, and I think that's where things can get a little tricky. I don't know. I mean, that's not true. I think from the get go, things can get tricky for people. I think um, maybe I'll, instead of a comment, I'll have more of a question, maybe a follow up question. When you say, let's say you give the example you gave, you have 40 milestones. Are those 40 things that absolutely must happen to close the sale? So these are not like ideal clients, right? Like ideally, I'd have a client that makes more than $100 million a year. But if they make 50, I can work with them. Like that's not a milestone. Like right, that what? So when
Um,
you say
well,
milestone, what do you
how would
consider?
you how you would turn that into milestone would be finding out the exact investment of what they're willing to put into. That's a milestone, absolutely.
Right.
Quantifying the value of what you're going to sell. So, example, if you're trying to sell to a client that makes $100 million a year, you're trying to sell them something, and you're asking them for, I don't know, a $3 million investment. Well, have you quantified the value of, well, I'm going to help you make 100 million if you invest 3 million with me? So that's a milestone.
Mm,
So yes, that would be a milestone. That's not a stage necessarily. That's a milestone in there. How you do that, well, then that might be in your methodology. You might have a link in your CRM to a playbook or to a video or to a PDF saying, what is quantification in our business? What
yeah.
happens? Here are some examples of questions you can ask. Here are some
Mm,
examples of past quantifications that we've done with existing clients. So it's very tangible. It's very real. It's very, oh yeah, I relate to this. That's
right.
how your
Right.
CRM becomes. That's how your CRM becomes a sales assistant, because it's reminding you, hey, Paul, you're here. This is what happens. Boop. You know.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah, and so then I could see, and that is, yeah. So I understand. So the 40, whatever, it doesn't have to be 40. That's the example you gave. But so then, yeah, I like that. That's the first, well, not in a way, the second step. Right, the first step was like understanding what
What
you
you're
do for your
quantifying.
customers and how do you help them achieve their objectives and all that. Then step two is like, oh, what are the X number of things you need to do? So the milestones to be able to understand whether you can help them. Right.
Yeah.
So those would be your milestones. And then which I feel like maybe one of the most difficult parts is understanding where that fits in each stage, right? Like, because quantification, for example, assuming that's the stage or that's a milestone, excuse me. Um, where does that happen? I think that's maybe that's why I like what you suggested, like to loop in or to have the different team members chime in, because for sure your top salespeople are doing that. Whether they're aware of it, whether they learned the methodology in the past and they're just kind of intuitively applying it, or whether they're just intuitively good at sales, let's say, and they're doing it without really following a specific methodology. I think that's interesting to understand how different team members are
Yeah.
doing it.
Well, full on heresy here, what I'll say, and you can hit me on the head on this one, but sometimes you can fill up different milestones. So let's say you're in stage one, or you're in discovery stage, but you're finding things out that are in confirmation before you've done your full discovery stage. Maybe most of the time you're following, usually most of the time your milestones are linear, but let's be honest, sometimes a quantification might happen a little bit earlier in the discovery stage rather than at the mid stage of confirmation. um, you know
Yeah, and that's what I liked about your milestone terminology as opposed to a stage, right? Because a lot of people will be like, okay, well, this is the discovery stage, and it's kind of like, well, you can't move a deal forward until you've done X, Y, Z. But the reality is like people are different, right? Some prospects you meet and they're like open books, right? And you understand everything and all your quantification, and you can technically move right away forward to the
yeah
proposal because you've gotten everything in
yeah
an
yeah
hour or
yeah
whatever. And
yeah
others is like you have an hour
Theoretically,
conversation and you
yeah,
barely
and
know
you
what their
still
name
don't know.
is.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes you're talking to someone and they'll say early in the conversation, "Hey, I figured this out. If we invest $100,000 in this product, we'll be able to move our factories ahead by $10 million a year." Well, they've told you this in the first 30 seconds. Well, in a lot of what I'm doing, that quantification happens in confirmation stage. But here you are in introduction, and you already have an element from your
Yeah,
confirmation. That's okay. It's
yeah,
write it down. You've got it. But you need
yeah,
to you need to know that. I talked about quantification because a big part of selling value is not what the value of your product is intrinsically. It's
Mm.
what does what does what does it bring to the client. So this might alternate, like you said. If you got a super extroverted client who talks to you like crazy in the first 5 minutes, well, then you might go fill up some different milestones according to different stages. But if you've got someone who's very introverted and quiet, then you might have to follow more of a traditional pacing to find things out, to build their confidence in wanting to speak to you. Or or if you got someone who's in a really bad mood, so whatever it might be, you might have to follow more of a traditional pacing. Whereas you've got other people. You're right. I've had people in the first 5 minutes, throw stuff that usually takes me an hour to get because they're super excited, or they're a reference, or I dealt with them in a past company. Like, there's all these things that can happen, but you're filling up that milestone.
Right.
So, but
Right.
if I was to, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I wanted to move on to like the next step, so to speak, because I know we both have hard stops, so I don't want to. Maybe we can do a V2 after this, but so like taking your milestones and putting them into different state, or understanding at which stage things can be done, or should be done. Meaning, like, for example, like quantification, for sure has to be done by the confirmation stage. If you get it before at stage one, that's great, but it for sure has to get done by confirmation stage. So it's breaking those steps up. It's like, so what happens next in your mind?
So, to me, what happens next, once you've sort of sat down with your team, or the experts on your team who have gone through, and you've gone through all the different milestones, or let's call it all the different steps of what happens in a sale. Then what you need to do is organize it in a manner that makes sense in your CRM. So what milestones should be fitting into a specific stage? And this is where I'm a little bit more, you can beat me up on this one too. Um, I don't like to see more than 7 stages maximum, but I think there's in your CRM, you've got your contacts, the people you're having conversations with, you've got your organizations who you're having conversation with. But let's talk about when you've got a deal. So you've got reason to think that you're sticking it into a pipeline. So all of a sudden you've got a deal. So what that means is you've done some preparation, and in your mind you feel there's something of value here. So in your preparation, you're talking to someone, you're doing stuff, it's sort of pre-deal. But then when you're having that conversation and you find out, there's a dollar value to the deal, there's interest. So you're starting in that introductory phase. You're finding out whether there's interest, there's value. But if you're killing it there, well, then it goes straight out. But if that
Yeah.
deal moves forward, then you're going into the discovery, right? So as you go into the discovery, there's a whole, to me, that's where all the gold happens. And to establish your discovery, what you're really discovering is all the things that are either going right with your customer's business, or they're not going right with your customer's business, and all the things that you're finding out about their business, how you can help them challenge wise. But even further than that, what does it enable them to do? What's their motivation? To me, that's all in discovery. So it's a huge discovery stage. But in most CRM sales process, I see an introduction, a discovery, a confirmation, a proposal, and a close. And all your different milestones will mostly fall into those stages. Now, of course, there's some businesses, like I was talking to someone this morning, they have a proposal stage and they have a proposal adjustment stage, because
Right.
things can happen. They're dealing with, they're dealing with what do you call it? Municipal transportation organizations. Quebec Transport, or Ontario. What do you call it? When you take the bus, what's that called? The service.
Public transit.
Yeah, thank you. They're dealing with public transit, so there's always an RFP that goes out. So with them, there might even be a stage or a milestone that's RFP. Well, where does that fit in? Is that more in discovery? Is that, they might even have an RFP stage. So it depends. So obviously there's some changes that can happen. But really, at a high level, what's happening in your client's reality, and that's why I bring it back to the buyer's journey, is you've got an introduction. So your client's finding out about you. You've got a discovery. That means you're finding out about the client. The
Mm.
discovery, you're making the client feel important because you're asking them questions that matter to them. In
Right.
the confirmation stage, why do I put it that? Because you're asking the client, you're confirming everything that's important to them. So they're going, yeah, 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 you're right. Okay. And then at the end of your confirmation stage, it's, well, Mr. Client, if we're able to help you do this, that, and that, is there any reason we shouldn't do business together? And then she'll say, no, all right, then you're ready for proposal stage. Well,
Mm.
now you're proposing everything that you've discovered and that you've confirmed. So essentially, there's no surprises there. And then because in your discovery, you've also quantified because you've asked them if this has the right value, are you willing to invest X? So you're all there. And then your
Mm.
proposal stage is no surprises. And then usually there's a close unless
Yeah.
something happens, right? So that's why I see those stages, because those stages really reflect, let's call it a typical buyer's journey, because that
Yeah.
buyer's journey is what that buyer is going through. You know, they're interested, they're earning trust, they're learning, and then they're deciding, yes, this can help my business, so I'm going to go forward.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I like that you're giving kind of a let's call it a blueprint, and obviously there is variations from business to business, and yeah, like you said, RFP stages, and if you're selling to government, obviously there'll be some differences than if you're selling to individuals, or if it's like kind of a low cost, even if it's B2B, low cost dollar amount versus a high cost dollar amount. Like there's definitely different stages, and that's it. Then you fit your milestones into there, and for you, like not you, Paul, but you, like for example, you like a confirmation stage might be super easy, right? It might just be like an email recap that you send, right?
Yeah,
Because you have a low dollar amount, you don't want to spend too much resources at each stage. You see, but somebody else like confirmation stage could be a whole pre-proposal stage, right?
yeah,
Which is
yeah,
like you have a whole
yeah,
summary
yeah,
presentation that lasts an hour and a half with
yeah,
all like here are all the details that we said and here's everything. And if you think about construction could be that, right? Like, well, here's everything that we talked about.
yeah.
You want to do this type of flooring and that type of
Correct.
this and this and
Yeah,
that, and this and that, and blah blah
exactly.
blah.
It's a
And we're
very
all
good
good on
example.
this. This is exact. Then you get to the proposal stage, which would be, well, to do all we just discussed. This is how much it would be. Um, Interesting.
And if you have
Yeah.
a really and if you have a really long sales cycle, some of the milestones that might some one of the milestones that can happen in a lot of different spaces, and I have a hard time with this in placing it somewhere, is sort of a nurturing milestone, because you might be nurturing someone after introduction because there's a
Yeah.
long period of time between introduction and discovery, a long period of time between different milestones. So that nurturing milestone, you might have a stage in there because let's say you're in an RFP season, or you have let's say you have a very typical, you're always selling to the same kind of clients, and there's always nurture, let's say, between confirmation and proposal. Well, then you put in your nurture stage there. So there's a lot of things that can happen, right?
Yeah.
And if you have a very, very short sales cycle, you might have a qualification stage, because you know what, in this situation, it all happens within 1 hour. So are they qualified? You might be
Yeah.
putting it in there. So yeah, there's a lot of that. So what I would
Awesome.
suggest, just to wrap it up, what I'd suggest to
Yep.
people, if you're trying to build a sales process, is look at all the milestones, talk to your team, look at a typical sales process, and see how it fits into those categories, and think of yourself, is there really a standalone category that looks at this? Because you and I both know that if you're selling SaaS or something, there's probably a demo stage. Well, we didn't talk about that, but if you have a demo stage, well, where does that fit in, and how do you do that, right?
Yeah.
Or is your demo a milestone? I don't know.
Or is it? Yeah, for sure. It could go a long way. You could argue that I sell software in some cases, right? If somebody doesn't have HubSpot, and
Yeah,
I've rarely done a demo, right? It's not, it's not one of my milestones. I mean, to me, it's like, do you need HubSpot? And it's more like the need that goes in after that, like what it looks like, that it's orange and black and you click right and click left and you could do this or you could do that.
yeah,
I'll do maybe some small elements here and there, but, demo is not always required when
yeah.
you're doing SaaS. All right, Paul. I know you have a hard stop. I have a hard stop too. That was a good overview. thinking about what you do for your customer and how you help them achieve their goals. Break that down into milestones. How do you get there? Break down those milestones into stages. And you talked about the 5 standard stages that you see, but obviously there's variations
Yep.
from one organization to the next.
All right.
This is interesting.
Very
Thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you, Fab. Thanks everyone for watching, listening, downloading. And of course, if you need any help with this, we're always happy to help you.
All right, Paul. Take care.
Fab doesn't like it when I do selling on the show. But if I can't help, I'm the sales guy. What do you want me to do? Okay. Thanks, Fab.
Bye.
Bye-bye.